The first way to take care of your pet is through pet insurance, and the second way is through pet estate planning. However, only a few pet owners actually have these for their pets. I'm joined by Wendy Hauser, an ASPCA pet health insurance veterinarian, to discuss why pet insurance could help save money for pet owners and give them peace of mind. How would pet insurance perhaps benefit someone?
Well, pet insurance benefits, the basic premise behind pet insurance is that it's not an investment tool. It's actually a way to share the risk of pet ownership. And so the way that pet insurance would benefit a pet owner would be to help to create a safety net should their pet become injured or sick and need medical care that exceeds their budgetary abilities.
And so even though it is seen as a safety net for pet owners, how come perhaps so few pet owners seem to have pet insurance?
Part of it, Alyssa, is an awareness issue. Pet insurance has been around since the mid 80s. We the brand that I am representing today, ASPCA Pet Insurance, actually originated as the second insurance company, a pet insurance company in the nation. So we've been around for a very, very long time. We were originally under a different brand name, and then in 2006 became the ASPCA Pet Insurance Program. So the reason in part is because it's something that people don't think about. There's recency bias. People may think they don't need it because their last pet didn't get sick, but you deal with retirement issues, and as a clinical veterinarian with more than 25 years under my belt in examination rooms, I can tell you that I've worked with a lot of people of retirement age that are just heartbroken when the prices exceed their budgets. And so I think that an awareness, there has been a big lack of awareness about the general price of veterinary care and the fact that pets are going to need care at some point in time in their life. So how can owners proactively plan for the care their pets are going to need? That's a conversation, Alyssa, that is not happening, and it needs to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, and speaking of people in retirement, do oftentimes people in retirement find it hard to get a pet because of how pricey perhaps the health could cost?
It can be a factor in deciding whether or not they have pets or get pets. What we tend to see is that pet ownership stays pretty strong up until retirement age. And then when people retire, they want to travel and they want to do fun things. And so they may decide not to have a pet during that time. Alyssa, I'm currently looking at that right now. I have the most beloved black lab. He'll be 11 in July, and my husband and I would like to go to Europe for a year. And so we're in the situation of either waiting for our son to finish a master's program before we leave, because we want our dog to live for a very long time. We're not wishing him ill, but so at that point, then we'll put pet ownership on a brief hiatus. I can't live without a dog in the house, and I'd love to have a cat in the house too. So when my mom and dad had pets, into their early 80s, they had dogs. And then after my father died, my mom was very worried about her budget, and being able to financially make it on just her retirement savings and Social Security. And she knew how much or pet care cost, and she chose not to get another pet, even though she would have loved to have had one, and she was lonely. So it's sad when economic choices dictate life choices.
With pet insurance, roughly how much does perhaps pet insurance cost?
It depends. It depends on the provider that you go with, and it depends on the policies that you choose. So one great thing about pet insurance policies is now they're highly customizable. And so a pet owner can decide how much they can afford to pay out of pocket and how much cushion they would like, how much of a safety net they would like. And there's a couple of different ways that that can be adapted. The first is by taking a look at what they want their annual limit to be. So when I started with my lab, I have ASPCA pet insurance on him. And when I started with his insurance, because I'm a veterinarian and I wasn't clinically practicing, I thought, gosh, I'm going to cover him for 15,000 a year. And over time, that has actually dropped down because of some statistics that suggest that about 93% of pet owners, and this was a couple years ago, 93% of pet owners did not spend more than $5,000 in a year on their pet from a claims perspective. So I was vastly overinsuring and overpaying for Oliver's pet insurance. So now he's down to $5,000 worth of coverage. As he gets older, his coverage gets more expensive because the likelihood I'm going to need it goes up, and the likelihood he's going to develop more conditions also increases. And so, what I've chosen to do is to also keep my deductible. I like a little bit more of a low deductible because I do like to get that money back a little quicker, even though I pay a little bit more monthly. So I have a $250 deductible on him, and then I have an 80% reimbursement level. So I pay 20% coinsurance on any eligible claims for him. And knock on wood, so my goal is to have no claims. I never want to use my pet insurance on him. That's my goal because it means he stays healthy. I've never, knock on wood, exceeded the 5,000. I do think he's probably getting some cataracts, so I think this year we may blow through our annual limit, but we'll see. It's nice to know. I'm in an enviable position of being able to afford his care. I'm not retired yet, so I'm not quite there, nor is my husband. So, but I can tell you from working with retired individuals, especially during the recession that hit in 2009, it became very, very difficult for them to accept recommendations. And the recommendations that they would usually accept were definitely cut back because when the stock market dropped to 6,500, it hit everybody's retirement and the dividends that were being paid.
And say if someone has like even an overall like very healthy pet, should they like even if they have like a healthy pet or like a pet with no pre-existing conditions, should they still consider pet insurance?
Absolutely. That's the best time to get it, when they're young and when they're healthy, because you just hit on an important point. So pet insurance is not an accident and health product. It is not like human insurance. It's actually a property product because our pets are legally considered property. And so pre-existing conditions do count. If you insured your house and you had hail damage on your roof, they're not going to insure that roof. You're going to have to get the roof fixed first. So pet insurance, because it's a property product, does not cover pre-existing conditions. So if you can get pet insurance while the pets are young, before pre-existing conditions kick in, and then they do develop something that is going to be very costly, say they hurt their knee and they need an ACL surgery, or say that they blow a disc in their back. Those are $15,000 plus surgeries now. The costs have just gone dramatically up. Or they get cancer. As long as you have that policy in place before any of those things happen, most of the providers will cover that. So the ASPCA brand did some research and they found that 57% of owners of insured puppies and about 47% of owners of insured kittens filed a claim in the first year. That's over half of the puppies. So yes, it pays to have pet insurance while they're young and they're mischievous and they're exploring the world with their mouth and they don't have the sense to stay out of danger, just like a toddler or a youngster wouldn't. So it does pay. And it also pays even if your pet has a pre-existing condition. I'm going to use Oliver again as an example. And the reason I'm going to use is he was a retired show dog. He was still young. He was 3 when I got him, but he came from Oklahoma and he had a flea bite allergy. And so he had a patch of hairless area over his tail because he was allergic to flea bite saliva. Well, there are correlations that say if your dog has a flea bite allergy, it's highly likely it's going to develop atopy, which is inhaled allergies. So the insurance would never cover any inhaled allergies on him. And that was okay because later in life he developed a food sensitivity, and they did cover for his specialist care and his specialist diagnostics, and they still pay for his prescription food. So it's an amazing plan. So even though he had a pre-existing condition, I knew there was still value in that. Now my daughter got her kitten when he was probably about 12 weeks old. And yes, he did have a claim in his first year, and that claim was a couple of $1,000s. And because he was insured, then he was covered. And it cost her, I think for about it was a $1,500 bill that time. I think she ended up getting about $1,100 covered. Pretty good deal. Especially because she was a medical student at the time. She had no income. So it was a good thing for us too.
Would pet insurance perhaps like save a pet owner money than paying like out of pocket with vet bills?
Well, yes, because it's going to share the risk of pet ownership. It's going to help them to pay for their pet's care. So absolutely. Now, again, it should never be viewed as an investment. You shouldn't say, I'm spending $1,600 a year, which I am, on Oliver's pet insurance, and he's covered up to $5,000. If I don't spend $1,600, then I'm not getting my value out of this. It should never be approached that way. Because remember, the goal is to never, pet insurance companies actually want you to use your policies because they know you see greater value when you do make claims. That being said, as a pet owner and as a veterinarian, I love healthy pets. And so I don't want to have to see you use your pet insurance. I can also tell you as a veterinarian that when people have pet insurance, the conversations are so much easier and so much less stressful for the pet owner because they're not having to choose between the care that they want for their pet and the care that they can afford for their pet. They're able to choose the care they believe is in the pet's best interest. And that's actually an important differentiation, right? Because personal beliefs really factor into this. There are some owners who would go, I mean, I had a friend who kept her dog alive on a respirator for over 24 hours before she could make the decision to let go. Personally, I'm far more pragmatic than that. I really look at quality of life. It's how I was raised. And as a veterinarian, I truly value quality of life. So that's not something I would ever do to Oliver, ever. And so that's where my belief system factors in as compared to my friend's belief system.
When perhaps a pet owner is like looking for which insurance policies or like whatever insurance company they should sign up for, what kind of questions do you think they should be asking themselves to get the best insurance for them?
Yeah, I think it's important to say, what are my goals? With anything, any financial decision that you make in life, you should know what your goals are. What are my goals? Do I need this policy to cover accident only? Do I need it to cover accident and illness? Do I want preventive care covered on there? Do I not? I mean, gosh, my lab's preventive care, his semi-annual visit, because he had a lot of blood work done, would have been over $800. So, again, understanding what the costs are. Talking to the veterinarian and saying, what do you expect the cost of care to be in the next year or the next 5 years or over my pet's lifetime? There's also a great website. I will say I did help to design it, but it's since evolved. And you can go to ASPCA Pet Insurance, I believe, and Gianna can send you the link for this, the ASPCA Pet Insurance.com cost of care, and there's actually a digital tool that will help you to see what real world owners have spent on 9 different dog breeds. We included mixed breeds, so if your breed isn't represented, you can say I have a small dog or I have a dog like a dachshund, but it's not really a dachshund. and 5 cap rates so that you can see what real world owners have spent at 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years of age, what they've spent with one claim, and what 50% of the owners have spent. So I should say that the ASPCA pet insurance program insures companion horses. So we're very unique in that. That's in about 16 states. We insure dogs and cats in all states. But if you have a 4-H horse or a trail horse or a companion horse, not a racehorse, it's not morbidity and mortality, but this is the insurance that horse owners need. I grew up on a horse ranch. I would have loved to have had this insurance.
In the case of perhaps a pet owner's like tragic death or like sudden death, like how would the pet insurance be able to like continue even like if the pet is passed on to a new pet owner?
No, so if the pet owner died, would the insurance policy go with the pet? No, the relationship is between the pet owner and the pet insurance company. This is another way that it differs from human health, where the relationship is with the provider, and so the pet insurance, whomever owned that pet would need to acquire a new policy on that pet.
And perhaps if someone doesn't have like pet insurance, what would be like the best way to pay for like a pet bill in cases of like an emergency?
It's so tough. It is so tough. There are a couple of different things that can be done. The first is that people can start having pet savings accounts. That takes a ton of discipline. And if I'm putting $50 a month in a pet savings account, at the end of the year, I'm going to have $600. I have to be honest, that's not going to get you very far in a pet emergency. And that takes a lot of discipline. You're going to be much better taking that money and putting it toward, even if it's just a $3,000 limited annual limit policy. You're going to be much better off getting better coverage for your pet than doing that. In a perfect world, pet owners would have 3 things to provide for the future health care of their pet. The first is pet health insurance. The second is a wellness plan to cover. So I, as a hospital owner, created my own wellness plans. I used to tell my clients, I can't predict the cost of illness, but I can predict the cost of wellness. So that helped to cover everything that they needed to keep their pets healthy and to keep them from getting diseases like heartworm disease or tick-borne diseases or intestinal worms or some of the vaccinations, some of the diseases that we can vaccinate against. And they could even choose to have dental care covered. Some insurance companies do cover dental care as part of their policy. The one that my dog and my daughter's cat has, ASPCA pet insurance, does cover dental care if the gums are inflamed. So then it's gingivitis, not just tartar. So having a wellness plan, having pet insurance, and having a third-party payer system in place. So the one that is most well known in the veterinary field is Care Credit. That's a dedicated health spending credit card. They typically partner with hospitals, and you can get 6 months same as cash. The thing you want to know about any of those health credit cards is that you want to have it paid off within that time frame, or the interest really kicks in, and they are relatively higher interest cards. Not higher interest than any other credit card would be. Now there's another interesting option that has come to light, and that is crowdsourcing. And crowdsourcing for pet health care expenses is something to consider. There are a couple of platforms out there now that work with veterinary hospitals. My favorite is My Balto. So it's Balto, like the dog that was in Alaska, and they actually work with pet insurance or with hospitals to set up 501c3 charitable foundations, and they do now run Fund My Pet campaigns through there. So it's a really interesting concept. So there are some other ways to help, and there are some charitable funds like the American Veterinary Medical Foundation. If your veterinarian is a member, they have an annual maximum that they can tap into that, but they can tap into some funds for indigent pets or for unique situations. I still think it's best to be empowered as a pet owner to plan for the future costs of your pet. They're going to happen. I don't care how great of care you take care of your pet. There are going to be things that pop up. And it's really hard to be on the other side of the table and to see the pain and the anguish that pet owners go through when they have to make decisions that they may not want to make for their pet, such as euthanasia or very limited care based on finances. It very definitely, it's one of the biggest drivers of burnout in veterinary teams and veterinarians. It breaks everyone's heart. So please, plan ahead. That would be my message.
Because I've heard like in extreme places where when people economically cannot afford bills or something, or like things like that with health, that they're more likely to euthanize their pet. So do people with pet insurance, are people who have pet insurance less likely to euthanize their pet?
The presumption is yes. Alyssa, I can provide you with a ton of data on other things. I can't provide you with actual numbers on that. I would say it gets back to the belief system. And I would say that if we empower owners to have options to care for their pets, most people are going to want to care for their pets. There was one study that was done. It was done by the American Veterinary Medical Association in Mississippi State. And they did ask pet owners if you could spend, and the numbers may not be quite right, I haven't looked at the study in a while, but if you could spend $200 to euthanize your pet, $1,200 to save your pet's life. It wouldn't be the same as it was, but it's going to be a functional pet. Or $5,000 to have your pet returned to perfectly normal. So just like it was before whatever happened, how much would you spend? And the vast majority of pet owners said they would absolutely spend the $1,200. So, and interestingly enough, 2/3 of the respondents in that study did have pet insurance. So there were 600 and some people responding in that study. So if you just Google AVMA pet insurance study, you'll probably be able to pull it up. Or if you would like, I can send it to Gianna and just let her know, and then she can send it on to you.
And is there anything else that perhaps we haven't covered or needs reemphasizing?
Well, I think that another interesting concept here is the concept of what pets do, because you're talking about people of retirement age. So there is an organization called the Human Animal Bond Initiative. It's HABRI research initiative, I think actually, is so HABRI. And they've done some research into how does having a pet impact people. And what they found was, and I'm going to look over here at my screen so I can read this to you to get this right, 85% of respondents agree that interactions with pets can help to reduce loneliness, and we know that's epidemic in retired people. 76% agree that human-pet interactions can help to address social isolation. And that's for people of all ages. There's reduced distress, there's improved quality of life, there's less depression, and increased physical activity and lowered blood pressure when you have a pet. And again, that is for all ages of life. What they did find was that older Americans with pets are less likely to suffer from health maladies connected to loneliness and social isolation. And it had the potential to lower annual Medicare spending by $1.8 billion. Pets are great for us. So that's what makes it even more tragic, Alyssa, when finances get in the way. As I said, my mom would have loved to have had a pet. It just was something that it just was not in her cards. So what did she do? My niece lived a mile away from her, and she would bring her dogs over so my mom could get some company. So it was a nice win-win, but not everyone is lucky enough to have family members that close.
Pet estate planning is not too commonly thought about, but is important when having a pet. Jeremy Cohen, attorney and founder of Boston Dog Lawyers, is here with me to discuss how to make an estate plan and ensure your pet's future. So, what is pet estate planning?
So, pet estate planning is the concept that your pet might outlive you. Uh, and really, it doesn't matter what age you are. I mean, there's so many things, so many obstacles in life where people could get sick or ultimately pass away that it's okay to plan for it in advance. And so it's the idea that there'll be money available for the care of your pet, but more importantly, you can select who will care for your pet after you pass away or after the owner or the keeper passes away. Um, that's either the owner who is the pet, the actual pet owner, or sometimes they give their dog to somebody to care for, and that's the pet keeper. And here in states like Massachusetts and really around the country, it's been growing and developing. This concept is now enforceable in court, and so it it's really an advancement for pet owners' rights and really a statement by the law that pets are have this special type of this uniqueness, this special property feature because they're biological in nature. They have needs, and this is to sort of make sure that they'll be cared for when you can't care for them anymore. And we call those pet trusts.
How much money could you perhaps give in these estate plans to your pet to make sure they're taken care of?
Right. So we think about dogs or cats or horses or whatever type of pet you have. We get calls about um, so many types, chickens and um, turtles and things like that. So you have to think about maybe you have pet insurance that could cover some of the healthcare costs of the pet. And so you could look at what the premiums are for that each year. And they tend to go up a little bit as your pet ages. So in theory, if the premiums are, let's say, $150 a month and your dog is 8, you want to project what the life expectancy is of that particular breed and species, and then that's a certain amount of money you could put away, or hand to the trustee, the person who's responsible for managing this trust. And it's enforceable, as I say, because trustees are bound with certain duties that they couldn't take that money and spend it on themselves. They have to spend it for the care of the pet. But with that, in a pet trust, you're also giving them decision-making authority. If a medical decision needs to be made about the pet, and oftentimes the trustee may not be the person who cares for your pet. They just oversee the care of your pet. There's some places starting to pop up, almost like pet nursing homes or pet assisted care. There's not a lot of them, and because there's not a lot, it's really expensive right now. But where you could say, I want, my Maisie, my golden retriever, if she outlives me, which I would be so happy about if she outlived me, that I could say, here's where I want her to be taken care of. Or maybe you select a certain person in the pet world or a certain sanctuary. So to do it right, that's one way for the health concerns to put whatever the premiums are for the life expectancy away to pay for the pet insurance. Also, if you think about food and the other things that go into the care, dog walking, um, um, the money to put away, if it depends if you want to also include for food and entertainment. Does your dog going to socialize? Going to go to a doggy daycare or things like that? And so it really can be worked out between you and the trustee. And sometimes people who are older don't have any money to be able to set aside uh, for the care of their pet. But this is still a better option than what we see some people doing, which is just dropping them off in front of a shelter, because elder pets can cost, the care for them can cost some money. There's people who you can reach out to and find, I'm sure, who will care for your dog or cat or other type of pet, even if you don't have the financial resources to do it. But it's high-end pet trusts where people who have an estate where they own a home and they have assets to pass on to other beneficiaries, they can probably deal with setting aside a certain amount of money. Others, it may be a trust where the trustee's working for it, but not getting paid or not getting any benefit from it, except making sure that your pet is cared for, your wishes are followed. Another benefit, just one other benefit of a pet trust is this. One of the types of law we handle is pet custody law, pet disputes between pet owners who aren't married or who live together, and we see that from people in their 20s and 30s to right now we have people in their 60s and 70s who just split up, they stop living together, and they battle over who gets the pet. If there's a pet trust in place, that's at least evidence of if you've both planned for life for the pet after you, if you both, either of you or both were to predecease the pet, that's proof that both of you have ownership rights in the pet. If you both show that you were caring for the pet even after you're not alive anymore. So there's other benefits to pet trust besides just making sure the pet is cared for. It can be another proof that you have ownership rights in the pet.
How many like trustees are allowed to be like assigned to a pet?
Well, estate planning, which is what this is part of, each state has their own rules. Like in some states, the person who's writing out the will or the trust, they have to sign by hand. In others, they can just make a mark. There's so many different rules, particularly to each state, that it would really depend on which state you're in. But usually you have at least a trustee and either a co-trustee or a secondary trustee if something were to happen to the main trustee. And sometimes the trustee could actually be an organization. So perhaps you say, okay, for us in Massachusetts, the MSPCA or your state Society for Protection of Animals, and say, okay, I'm donating money to you, or I'm giving money to you to care for my pet. They may or may not. You should check with the local SPCA where you are. But that's another option, that the trustee is not necessarily a single person.
For estate planning, like how much does it cost to perhaps like make one?
It's not very expensive. And if we were to do it here, we'd have a consultation. We'd want to learn about your pet, learn about your pet's life, your pet's health, learn about your position in life, how you, not just health, but your financial health. And it can be hourly, but usually it's a flat fee. And here it probably, for a basic trust, I can see it being $1,000, and which is also is somewhere around 1,000. It certainly could be less. I mean, I think right now, an office like mine at Boston Dog Lawyers, we want the concept that you can care for your pet after you pass away to develop, because we need these pets to be cared for. So it's about being paid for the work, but not profiting from the work right now, because we just need to get the concept out there for people.
Yeah, and so why would you like recommend or suggest to someone why they should get a like estate plan for their pet?
People should have estate plans for themselves too, because you want to control what happens after you're gone. In theory, it's a will, so it's your will. It's what you want to have happen, and they're enforceable around the country because there's certain rules and there's a sanctity about a will or a trust, that this is what the person wanted. So the benefits we've talked about, to make sure while you're alive, even it can ease that anxiety of what's going to happen to my pet. And it can also be in case of disability. I've had people who have had to go into the hospital for months at a time, on an emergency basis and they don't have any plan for their pet. Well, the trust at times could speak to what could happen if there's an incapacity, not just death of the pet owner. And the alternative is what I see, which become pet custody cases, are people have to go into the hospital, let's say, and they say, okay, they find a friend who will take care of the pet for a while. But we know these time and again they fall in love with the pet, and then they don't want to give it back, and so suddenly you're going to court to get back custody, possession of your pet. But if there's a writing in place, it just makes it a lot simpler as to what the next step is when you're feeling good again to get your pet back. So they have other, they don't just speak to the actual purpose of the trust after you die, who's going to care for your pet. But it relieves the anxiety I have found for people while they and their pet are alive, that if they're so worried about their duty to their pet, because we all have that obligation, that they don't want to let the pet down. And so this can ease that anxiety while you're alive, to know that you have a plan in place. The alternative is your pet could end up, if there's nobody present, your pet sometimes could end up staying in the house for a long period of time without anybody even knowing there's a pet that needs help, but also getting delivered to a shelter. And if your pet's at a shelter, the reality is it's very hard to get people to adopt senior pets because of the cost. If they're puppies, is going to be no problem, but even a dog that's 4 or 5 years old, some people don't want to adopt. Everybody wants a puppy, so you want to make sure that you've planned ahead.
When someone is like perhaps creating an estate plan for their pet, what kind of questions should they be asking themselves?
Who do they trust? So who are pet owners that they know that they can trust? Who are people who've met their animal? Maybe they go to a dog park and 2 dogs love to play with each other. Maybe that's a person who you talk to. Hey, if something were to happen, or maybe you do it mutually. If something were to happen to me, I'll take your dog, and if something happens to me, you'll take my dog, and if something happens to you, I'll take your dog. But it should always be in writing. It can't be just, we discussed it. It really shouldn't even be a text message. It should be something that it's a legal document that has clear specifications under the law. So it should be drafted by an attorney. And I don't say that to promote more work for attorneys, but I know spending money up front to get it done right is far less costly than what you have to do after something happens to try to make things right again. And so you want to think about people that you know. You also want to think about organizations that you know, because again, you could pick a person to oversee the money and the placement of the dog, who will actually place the dog at maybe a sanctuary that you've picked out. There's a massive one in Texas, but again, that one, it's really expensive because they're going to care for your pet really well. So you could start to search for these places, which will continue to pop up. I think that's the next area of pets that will one day develop, where it's just natural that your pet can go to a senior living center.
If perhaps someone doesn't have anyone like in mind to take care of their pet in the event of their death, what would you suggest that like perhaps like they should hand the pet off to?
Well, I think like a local animal rescue league, or again, the local SPCA in your state. And there's offices, just because it might be in the big city, but they have satellite offices too. Another idea is speak to people a different level of people you trust. Speak to your veterinarian, speak to your trainer, and they may know people who would be doing that. Also, I think if you speak to your vet about it, they may have some ideas as to facilities that might be taking in these types of animals, because some vets will go on a mobile basis to these facilities to treat the animals. in a group, so maybe they'd have some ideas too. I can tell you that I'm always willing to help people try to find that person. Um, so they can always reach out to Boston Dog Lawyers. We have a staff of 11, so somebody's going to dig in deep to try to help you find somebody. But what you're doing is just so important because not enough people, instead of giving the word to one person, one pet owner at a time, you're spreading it to a bunch of people who are going to tell a bunch of people, and this will live somewhere where people can get educated. And educating people about pet trust is just as important as educating people about pet insurance. And pet insurance is so important. And the reality is only 2 to 3% of pet owners have pet insurance. Some don't know what it is and others just don't trust it. But I can tell you, having pet insurance for my dog has taken decision making out of the equation in terms of how much will this cost, where you can just understand the medical procedures behind what the vet is suggesting instead of also having to consider the cost, because pet insurance will step in many instances.
When it comes to, I guess, actually creating the estate plan, is that just going up to perhaps like a pet lawyer and being like, oh, like I want to create this document, or is there something more?
So you could certainly go to the person, the lawyer who may have drafted your will or estate plan initially, which can always be modified. And that person may or may not understand animal trust, pet trust. There certainly are lawyers like us who specialize and have resources in other states. There's a great lawyer out of Florida who is sort of like a center for this information and can refer people out. So at the same time we're trying to promote this, we're also promoting the concept of there should be a pet lawyer in every state who focuses on this. So they'll go together in terms of growth. But again, we at Boston Dog Lawyers, we want to be a resource for pet owners around the country to the extent we can. We're only licensed to practice law in Massachusetts right now, but by reaching out to us, we're happy to always lead you somewhere as a courtesy.
When it comes to wills and trusts, what are the difference between the two?
They both are on a continuum as to your wishes, but in a trust in general has even more protections, I would argue, more protections for the person. They're both the same. Trusts have really taken off in the last 2 decades. Through trusts also, there may be some financial benefits, some tax benefits through having property pass through a trust as opposed to through a will. But they're similar in nature. Like an apple and an orange are fruits, and maybe the orange came along after the apple, so it has a little bit more modern nuances to it, or is recognized under the law as being a more modern approach. But the concept goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And if you die without a will or a trust, there's a certain set of rules each state has as to who would be the next beneficiary, but you suddenly have no control over that. And it could be that if you have no close family, maybe there's a cousin that's found 300 miles away or something, but sometimes if there's nothing to do with it, it'll go back to the state, and then they can benefit from property that wasn't properly willed to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And does creating a trust, does that cost money also? Or?
It does, and trusts tend to be more expensive than a will. But again, these features for clients, trusts and wills, depending on the size of your estate. So depending economically where you're at, that's sort of how you can understand your will or trust will cost, because it just becomes more complicated. If somebody doesn't own a house and just has a car and a dog and they rent an apartment, it's going to be a lot simpler to set up. And so the price usually is scaled accordingly. But these are not big hitters for lawyers in terms of fees. They should get paid for their work and make sure everything is done right. And the good thing is you can always update them too. You can always go back to a lawyer or a different lawyer as your life, things in your life change, and make changes to your will or trust.
Hmm. And how does one go about like making a trust? Is it the same process as the will or?
Yeah, so you go to either an estate, typically a lawyer who specializes in estate planning. And even though you might not think you have an estate, because we think of estates as, at least I do, giant properties with tons of land, it's just the concept that anything you have that's an asset for you is comprises an estate. So you don't have to have a certain amount of wealth or property to take advantage of one.
What will perhaps like happens to a pet when there is no will or trust made?
Sometimes they'll be brought to a shelter. Sometimes we've had cases where the landlord comes in and finds the person died and what to do with the dog. And someone who you don't know is probably going to take control of your pet's life. And sometimes if they go to a shelter and they're there for too long, excuse me, I mean, the worst things you can imagine can happen. Because it's also not healthy for a pet to just stay at a shelter for a long period of time. It really denigrates their mind. It can cause some great anxiety, and so it's out of your control. So sometimes they'll come in the front door, and at some point they're going to go out the back door, and they're not. And the shelter operators are not doing it out of meanness, but at some point it's just not a way for a dog to live in a shelter every day. And so there's so many dogs up for adoption that you have to think about the fact that, as I said before, if your pet's not a puppy, the population of people who want to adopt goes way down because most people want a puppy. So it takes a special type of person to want to take on a middle-aged or senior dog, and there's just not that many of us right now. And so you want to try to control it as much as you can to find those people on your own. Because when you don't go to a shelter, if the dog goes to the shelter, suddenly they're trying to find people for 10 dogs your dog's age, not just your dog. So that's why it's so much better if you could put a little bit of planning into your dog's life in case you pass.